In the early 1990s, Seattle felt like an amphitheater built out of rain. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden took the stage one by one, and the noise climbed toward the clouds. But in the middle of the crowd, a skinny figure in a torn leather jacket gripped the microphone, and instead of piercing eardrums, he shook rib cages. Layne Staley's voice bounced like a jagged meteor, cracking on high notes like shattered glass. It was fractured even before it ever hit the ground. Critics called it raw and unsettling, but listeners found themselves right at the heart of that discomfort. Once, when an MTV host introduced Man in the Box for the third time in a row, he said, "This isn't a song, it's a confession." Layne's voice rejected studio polish. Engineers tried putting compressors on his vocals, but the wind slipping through the cracks in his throat would blow right through them. The whispered line in nutshell, "We chase misprinted lies," grew larger in the silence. Years later, kids from the Balkans to South America would write in YouTube comments, "This song stopped me." But Layne himself never stopped, because to stop, you first have to slow down, and he never did. In this documentary, you'll see the secret sketchbooks behind platinum albums, the hidden smile while washing glasses in a Tokyo back alley, and the wild laughter that started with leopard print underwear on a Van Halen stage. But you'll also hear the tremble in finger joints gripping a mic stand with a broken wrist cast, and the tear hidden in a studio lit only by candles. Because Layne Staley's story isn't just about collapse. Inside every scream, there was a second fragile voice trying to survive. And now, at the end of 2 minutes of silence, the story begins. Layne Rutherford Staley was born on August 22, 1967, in Kirkland, Washington. His admiration for Mötley Crüe's drummer Tommy Lee grew so strong that by the time he turned 18, he went to a neighborhood courthouse and legally changed his middle name to Thomas. His passion for music began almost with his first steps. According to his family, at age 3, he wouldn't stop drumming on a tiny trampette in his preschool rhythm group. But the trampette wasn't the only surface he struck. Crayons and pencils flowed just as fast. His earliest drawings were of skeletons carrying guitars and winged monster vocalists. His mother, Nancy, would pin his drawings on the refrigerator and say, "My son doesn't just hear, he sees." At 12, he snatched a drum set from a garage sale and kept pounding on it until the neighbors called the police. His mother tried to bargain. "Play after dinner," she said. Layne played both before and after dinner. In between, he would plaster the door of his room with posters he designed himself, neon slime letters, glam-armored skeleton warriors, with a small signature tucked in the corner, L. Staley. His love of drawing grew more serious. He drew cartoons for the school newspaper to earn small change, designed cassette covers for his classmates, and created an imaginary band mascot called Bone Man, adding him to every notebook. Sound and drawing were two sides of the same story, one to scream, one to sketch. By 17, the kid whose notebooks once overflowed with doodles was fronting his own band, trading crayons for chords. The band practices he started in his family basement quickly evolved into a heavy metal project called Sleaze, and eventually morphed into Alice N Chains, while Layne filled the margins of his notebooks with lyrics like, "Stare into my eyes so you don't see me fall." His teachers grew concerned. Layne would just shrug and say, "It's just like a comic book. It's fiction." Years later, some of those old sketches and lyrics resurfaced in fan circles and bootleg scans online, but most of it remained locked away in the memories of those who knew him before the spotlight ever found him. Music Bank was a labyrinthine old flour mill turned into a rehearsal complex in Seattle. Through its thin walls, Slayer riffs, funk bass slaps, and dreams not yet born would leak out at all hours. In January 1987, Layne Staley, barely 20 years old, was there. Soldering cables more than singing, chasing after the sounds echoing through the cracked concrete corridors. One night, down one of those hallways, he heard a riff, melodic but fierce. Standing at the doorway, he saw Jerry Cantrell, who was using an electrical cord as a guitar strap, and whose only possession seemed to be a blanket and a worn-out amp. "I've got tape, you've got strings, play that riff again," Layne said. Jerry played the riff again. Layne improvised a scream that made the cracked concrete vibrate. During a break, when a suitcase and a pillow emerged from under Jerry's blanket, Layne understood. Jerry was living there. "If the couch is free, crashing is temporary," Layne said, handing him his apartment key. Their first shared meal was burgers from Lost Lake Cafe, and their partnership was sealed. Within a week, their apartment turned into a tiny factory. By day, they tore through frantic jam sessions at Music Bank. At night, they rattled the neighbor's chandelier with songs like "We Die Young" and "It Ain't Like That." Finding a band name was painful. Diamond Lie, Mothra, Alcatraz Cadets. None felt right. Layne jokingly suggested a parody, Alice in Chains. The early posters featured fake blood and glam makeup, but the music grew heavier and darker by the day. They recorded a 5-song demo at Music Bank. The cassette landed in the hands of Damon Stewart, a DJ at KISW Radio. He played "We Die Young" 4 times in a single night. Phone lines lit up immediately. Meanwhile, a copy of the tape reached Columbia Records' AR man Nick Terzo. Within 48 hours, Layne had a plane ticket to Los Angeles. In the studio, when he first heard his voice through a clean monitor, he whispered, "Is that really me?" The engineer nodded. "Frighteningly, yes." Their 5,000 first-run EPs sold out within weeks. For a full album deal, and they dove headfirst into the studio to record Facelift. Late nights under the glowing red record light found Layne staring into the glass, whispering, "I guess this is really happening." In that moment, it felt like a beginning. No one could have imagined how quickly that fire would burn through everything. Facelift dropped on August 21st, 1990. A few months later, they gathered in a weathered barn outside Seattle to shoot the Man in the Box video. When Layne insisted on bringing a live pig onto the set, the director panicked. They compromised with hay bales instead and shot the clip. Still, it rocketed into MTV's Buzz Bin, making Alice in Chains the first Seattle band in heavy national rotation, months before Nirvana. After opening for Slayer and Megadeth, they joined Van Halen's tour. Backstage, Sammy Hagar bet them $100 that they couldn't shock him. At their show in Oklahoma City, Layne and drummer Sean Kinney hit the stage wearing leopard print women's underwear, AIC scrawled across their chests in marker. Eddie Van Halen laughed so hard he missed an entire solo. The silent hero behind all of this? The plaid couch. When Layne handed Jerry a key and said, "Crashing here's fine," that couch became ground zero. Riffs, rot, and reality soaked into its fabric. Alice in Chains didn't start in a studio. It started right there, with noise, silence, and two guys too broke to quit. Spring 1992, Los Angeles. Dusty palm fronds trembled outside an open studio window, while inside, Layne Staley was pinning pages of lyrics to the walls with a staple gun. Producer Dave Jordan later recalled, "Layne brought a new page every day, and as the words dried, their colors got darker." The album's working title was Sad Story, and no one laughed. Layne would line up at a methadone clinic at 8 a.m., head to the studio by noon, and spend long hours staring into the glowing red light of the recording booth. Jerry Cantrell laid down heavy riffs, anchoring the songs by nailing his guitar licks into an old rug they had thrown across the floor. Rooster was a letter to Jerry's Vietnam veteran father. Angry Chair was a voice from Layne's own childhood nightmares, like a self-portrait of his Bone Man sketches. The album, eventually titled Dirt, was released on September 29, 1992. It sold 80,000 copies in its first week, went platinum within 4 months, and peaked at number 6 on the Billboard charts. MTV aired the Rooster video relentlessly. Backstage, Layne quipped, "The video turned the song into a cage. Now we're just counting the bars." Success didn't quiet his inner struggles, it turned them into a megaphone. On the tour bus bathroom wall, they posted a handwritten sign, "Rule number 1, no drugs, no other rules." Below it, Layne had doodled Bone Man tucked under a blanket, muttering in a speech bubble, "I tried." In June 1993, they had a brief layover in Tokyo. While the band explored Tsukiji Fish Market for breakfast, Layne disappeared into the crowd. Managers frantically called embassies, hospitals, and police stations. 48 hours later, a trail of hints led them to a tiny 9-seat bar in Shinjuku, where Layne was found washing glasses. When they approached, he just said, "Nobody interviews the dishwasher." Just days later, during preparations for the Lollapalooza tour, Layne accidentally shot himself in the right wrist while cleaning a scoped rifle. Doctors wanted to cast it in a neutral beige color, but Layne insisted, "Make it purple. Even wounds deserve color." He hit the stage with the purple cast, his body pale but his eyes scanning the crowd like a lighthouse. During "Wood," he clenched through the pain and still hit the final soaring note. After the tour ended, Grammy nominations followed, but Layne kept a distance from the celebration. "My only trophy is still standing after the stage lights go out," he said. One night in a dusty Arizona motel room, their band voicemail recorded a trembling message. "Your songs are keeping me alive, but it's getting so dark."
Sean Kinney gave the note to Layne.
Layne dialed the number back from a gas station payphone, 3 tries before the boy answered. They talked for 45 minutes about comics, cats, and cereal brands. When the call ended, Layne simply wrote in his notebook, "If you can replace a voice, you can shrink the silence." By 1994, the touring schedules were wearing Layne down physically and mentally. Still, he returned to the studio with Alice in Chains and in just 4 days, recorded an acoustic EP, Jar of Flies. It became the first EP ever to debut at #1 on the Billboard charts. After recording Nutshell, Layne shrugged and said, "I got caught by the thing I was running from." For the cover photo, the band trapped flies inside a glass jar under studio lights, watching them drop one by one. Nobody knew whether Layne's words would one day sound like a memory or a prophecy. As exhaustion mounted and success spun faster, Layne kept a copy of a backstage Polaroid. His cast covered in signatures with one word scrawled over it in fluorescent marker, "Stop." But the machine kept following the shadow of his voice. After the tour, when they returned to Seattle, the doctor's report was shocking. Layne's lung capacity had dropped to 60%. "If you don't slow your pace," they warned, "your breath will leave you behind." While the label pressured him to get back to the studio, the phone rang. Mike McCready from Pearl Jam was calling. He was trying to stay sober and wanted to form a side project. They called it Mad Season, a British slang for a period of heavy drinking. Layne felt the branch being extended to him. "Maybe we can tell our nightmares while we're still awake," he said, and accepted. Mad Season rehearsals began in the damp basement of St. Therese Church on the edges of the city. Cables dangled from the ceiling. The paint peeled from the walls. At the first rehearsal, Layne gripped the microphone and joked, "If my voice cracks, don't stop. The cracked line makes the better drawing." That day, the first sentence he wrote in his notebook was, "My pain is self-chosen." 1 week later, River of Deceit was recorded. When performing the song live, Layne would close his eyes and tell the crowd, "Don't resist the current. Let it take you wherever it wants," as if he already knew he would eventually surrender to his own. Sobriety, however, didn't last. In March 1995, Layne's former fiancée, Demry Parrott, suffered severe heart-lung complications. Every evening, Layne went to the clinic, where they would sit together coloring Bone Man sketches in a notebook. The doctors said, it would take a miracle. Tears welled up in his eyes because, while everyone else's voice around him was fading, the roar in his own veins was only growing louder. Above, Mad Season's album was released on March 14, 1995. As River of Deceit climbed the charts, Layne checked into the Hazelden Clinic in Minneapolis for rehab. Interview requests flooded in, but McCready answered them saying, "Layne's busy weaving himself a new pair of lungs." Demry Parrott passed away on October 29, 1996, while Layne was in Los Angeles preparing for the mixing sessions of Alice in Chains' MTV Unplugged performance. The phone rang at 5 a.m. Layne stayed silent for a long moment, then said through tears, "Don't hide her voice. She loved hearing it echo." Demry's death became Layne's final breaking point. Dental infections, severe weight loss, and vascular damage began to isolate him from the stage. But when his bandmates called him into the studio saying, "We're recording," Layne still showed up because he had made a promise to Demry, "I'll sing clean one more time." In April 1996, in New York City, Alice in Chains stepped onto the MTV Unplugged stage. 100 candles were lit to warm the cold studio. They even modified the air conditioning system so the lens wouldn't fog up. But the warmth reached all the way to Layne's fragile skin, now barely covering his bones. Backstage, Jerry Cantrell whispered, "Are you ready?" Layne tucked his purple-dyed hair behind his ear and answered, "I'm not ready, but I'm real." When Sludge Factory ended, Layne leaned back into his chair and placed his hand on his chest. During Nutshell, his voice wavered for a moment, but then returned a small victory. Under the candlelight, as the camera zoomed in, a salty tear caught the flame's glow in his eyelashes. It became one of the most iconic, haunting images in music history. Demry's funeral was silent. No songs were played. Afterward, Layne locked himself away in his apartment for a week, answering no calls. Tour schedules, Grammy nominations, label demands, all seemed hollow now. On his answering machine, he left a single message for his friends. "Demry became a note. I became the silence." Years later, Jerry Cantrell would say, "After that day, Layne's voice stayed in the same octave, but it howled without end." When Unplugged was released at the end of 1996, fans still searched every newspaper clipping and TV replay for signs that Layne was coming back. Still, the Unplugged performance entered music history as one of the rawest recordings ever. A prayer rising from candles, with Layne's voice still waiting somewhere out there in the darkness. A rust-colored morning in March 1997. Layne Staley sits alone in the back corner of Market House Diner in Seattle, quietly sipping his coffee. When the waitress offers a refill for the third time, he simply says, "2 minutes of silence." Silence had become more tempting than the hum of stage lights. Meanwhile, newspapers were screaming, "Is he missing?" Rumors kept growing. Later that year, Layne moved into a dark apartment in Capitol Hill. The windows were covered in black curtains, the mailbox stuffed with greeting cards. Inside the apartment, the most valuable object was still a microphone stand. Scattered nearby were unpainted Warhammer figurines and rolled-up sketch papers. In 1998, Jerry Cantrell managed to convince Layne to return to the studio briefly. Layne recorded 2 final songs, "Get Born Again" and "Died." Before stepping into the recording booth, he tapped his foot against the ground and said, "One's a greeting, the other's a funeral." At the end of the first take, he pulled off his headphones and quietly said, "The note is still there. I just wish the body could stay with it." Between 1999 and 2000, Layne slipped almost completely into seclusion. Dental infections, extreme weight loss, and collapsed veins narrowed his life to a small, silent world. But his sketchbooks kept filling. Neighbors later found discarded Bone Man drawings in the trash. The guitar had been turned into a sword. During this period, anonymous packages began arriving at youth rehabilitation centers across Seattle. The center was listed as L Noise. Inside the boxes were cheap acoustic guitars, stickers that read "Play Loud," and little sketches of Bone Man holding a torch. Therapists used the guitars during group therapy sessions, but no one ever knew it was Layne behind them. His voice lived on through the music. In late 2001, when Microsoft released the first Xbox, Layne cracked his curtains just enough to accept the delivery. He created a username, Raise-A-Glass. Late at night, he would play online basketball games, joking, "No zip codes, no sweat smells, just the scoreboard." The last person to see him alive was his former bassist, Mike Starr. They argued about Layne's refusal to seek help, and as Mike walked out the door, Layne's voice followed him. "Don't leave me like this." Those were his last words. After that night, no one saw Layne again. Calls went unanswered. Days passed, until finally, 2 weeks after his death, it wasn't a bandmate or a journalist who came looking. It was his mother, Nancy McCallum. They waited outside as the police broke through the door. The TV screen was frozen with static. The Xbox controller had fallen beside the couch. Unopened mail, dry paintbrushes, and empty nutrient drink bottles sat scattered on the table. The apartment was silent.
except for Sadie and the low hiss of the television still humming in the dark. The autopsy later confirmed he had died on April 5, 2002, the same day Kurt Cobain passed, 8 years earlier. By the time they found him, his body had withered to 86 pounds. The cause was listed as an overdose, but it wasn't the drugs that wrote the last line. It was the silence he chose, and no one could break. A Polaroid camera was found in the bathroom. The lens still pointed toward the mirror. No one ever talked about what it had captured, if anything at all. But we do know this. The last time Layne was photographed, he was holding his newborn nephew, soft smile, faded eyes. That photo was never released. It belonged to the family. After the apartment was cleared, there wasn't much left, just his cat, Sadie. Jerry took her in. She lived 8 more years, quiet, loyal, maybe the only one who really knew how much he'd tried to stay. Jerry Cantrell heard the news while on tour. That night on stage, he played differently, slower, heavier, like every note was carrying something it couldn't quite hold. When the song ended, he leaned into the mic and whispered, "We lost the loudest silence I've ever heard." A year later, a book was released claiming to contain Layne's final interview. The author said it was based on a phone call with Layne just months before his death, but his family said the call never happened. There was no recording. The book faded from shelves, and the silence Layne left behind stayed. Years after his voice went silent, the city of Seattle remembered. 2nd, 2019, Layne's birthday. Seattle declared it Layne Staley Day. His family later founded the Layne Staley Memorial Fund, helping others fight the same darkness he once faced. What he left behind wasn't just music, but a quiet force that still pulls people back from the edge. According to the police report, the last sound in Layne's apartment was static noise. But for his fans, Layne's final note wasn't noise. It was the aching rise in his voice during Nutshell, still hanging in the air, refusing to fall. The man who once clutched a microphone to drown out the world now speaks louder with every replay. If this story touched you, share the video, leave your own Layne memory in the comments, and subscribe. Every click sends his echo a little further. And if you or someone you love is struggling with addiction, please consider speaking to a professional. Music once kept Layne alive. Now it keeps the light on for others finding their way.